With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We're joined by MarkMonitor domain management experts, Alison Simpson and Kiran Malancharuvil. Alison Simpson is Senior Product Marketing Manager of Domain Management at MarkMonitor, with over 11 years of experience in the domain name industry. Alison has worked closely with several Fortune 1000 companies and has managed a team of client services managers that provide support to MarkMonitor customers. Alison has managed all aspects of corporate domain management, including domain registration and maintenance, new GTLD strategy consultations, and continues to work with many of MarkMonitor's Fortune 100 companies to provide industry insight and domain protection strategies. Kiran Malancharuvil is the policy counselor for MarkMonitor, responsible for monitoring the legal, legislative, political, and regulatory environment around brand ownership. She represents the interests of MarkMonitor clients at ICAN through the Intellectual Property Constituency, at INTA as a member of the Internet Committee, and at IACC as a member of the Internet Task Force. Kiran has taken a leading role defending brand and consumer interests on policy and advocacy issues related to the new GTLD program, Registrar Accountability, accessibility of website ownership data, and consumer fraud. She is a trademark attorney with experience in international and domestic trademark prosecution, litigation, anti-counterfeiting efforts, and brand protection counseling. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Alison to get us started.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a lot of content to cover, but before I get started, I just want to remind you to please use the Q&A box to ask any questions, and we'll do our best to address your questions towards the end of our session. Before we dive into the top domain management strategies for 2016, I wanted to take a bit of time and set the stage by reviewing the key trends of 2015, including what the domain market looks like in terms of growth, what types of new GTLD complexities challenged brand owners, the steps companies took to really optimize their domain portfolios, and we'll review some of the domain security steps and preemptive measures that can be put into place to help reduce your vulnerabilities and protect your critical assets. And then Kiran will take a look back at the ICAN initiatives that were in motion throughout the year. So with that, let's take a look at key trends of 2015. By the end of 2015, global domain registrations totaled 311.5 million registrations, which is an 8% increase from Q4 2014. While new GTLDs did contribute to some of this growth, the majority of the growth came from legacy GTLDs, largely .com, which grew higher than average. And some of the growth was attributed to sales in China. CCTLD registrations grew by 3.2% and total 142 million registrations. The 10 largest CCTLDs worldwide, you can see the snapshot up there, account for 49% of all CCTLD registrations. You'll notice on the table it doesn't include those CCTLD registries where that they give away domains for free, like .tk, which is reported to have around 28.6 million domains. But I think this is a better representation of what the largest CCTLDs really are. So last year, we were introduced to several new GTLD complexities that involved launch fees, withholding of names, and some problematic registry models. So let's take a look at the current new GTLD domain landscape. New GTLDs, like I said before, account for 3% of total domain registrations and total 11.5 million domains. You could see from the chart on the left, in terms of total registrations, the most popular are .xyz, .top, .wang, .wen, and .club. The list on the right is a representation of what corporations are registering. You can see it's a very different list than what the general public is registering. Since the launch of the new GTLD program, over 800 TLDs have been delegated. There were 121 open generic TLDs that launched in 2015. And over 15, we saw an increase in the geo or professional types of TLDs. In 2014, roughly 10% of the 290 GTLDs that launched were restrictive in nature. And in 2015, upwards of 18% of the 121 TLDs that launched required registrants to provide some type of requirement, like a local presence requirement or some type of DNS requirement to complete the registration. And we do expect this number to increase slightly over the course of 2016 as more industry-specific extensions go live. So MarkMonitor took a closer look to see how particular verticals were protecting their brands in the new GTLD space. We found that companies are registering selectively and taking advantage of blocking where available and registering where there's a close correlation between their brand and the TLD. So from this representation, it makes sense that a hospitality company would register a .vacation, .rental, a geo-TLD like .nyc or .london, and that pharmaceutical companies would protect themselves in .healthcare or .exposed. So very interesting to see how particular verticals and how corporations overall are protecting their names, their brands in this domain landscape. While the total number of launches decreased last year, 120 compared to 290 in 2014, there was not a decrease with complexities that brand holders faced. The increase in the different types of launch phases challenged brand owners. We witnessed more brand protection pricing tiers where brands had to pay premium prices to protect their brand, and we saw an increase in the problematic registry models. Prior to new GTLD program, we saw launch phases that consisted of a sunrise period, a limited registration period, maybe a grandfather phase. There was a land rush and then an open registration or general availability. But now we're seeing increase in the number of registries utilizing an early access period or EAP as part of their launch plans. EAP fees have been known to reach upwards of $5,000 for registration on the first day. Excluding donuts and right-side registry extensions, there was only one new GTLD that operated EAP in 2014. In 2015, we saw 17 other registries run early access periods as part of their launch plans. And EAP has been fairly successful for certain registries, and we anticipate that more registries will adopt this model in 2016. Brand holders faced their brands being withheld as part of qualified launch program or reserve lists. And the qualified launch program basically allows registry operators to register up to 100 domains to third parties prior to the sunrise period for what they say is the purpose of promoting their TLD. So on top of that, we saw an increase in the number of premium domain names, which I'll go into in just a bit. But what we did, a good thing we did see was the release of the previously unavailable domains that were on collision lists. And overall, brand owners paid more to register their brand in 2015. To purchase a domain during sunrise in 2013, the average price ran around $275 per domain. As we moved into 2014, it increased by almost $100 and averaged around $375 per domain. The average in 2015 was $1,000 per domain. And this was the increase was inflated due to registries who had sunrise fees in excess of $1,000 per domain, as well as GTLDs who had yearly registration prices of upwards of $2,000, even in general availability. So, as more extensions have gone live, it is apparent that these registry reserve lists and premium domain lists have grown as well. When the first 39 new GTLDs launched in 2013, the average premium list length was just about 2,800 names per extension. By the end of 2014, that had grew to 3,300. In looking at the premium list in 2015, over the 120 GTLDs that went live, the premium list grew to just under 35,000 domains per extension. So is anyone actually using these new GTLDs? So far, we haven't seen a lot of new GTLDs in use. We're starting to see a little more use with generic TLDs, with some local companies advertising in their local areas with a dot pizza, or we're starting to hear some commercials. There was an example of a gal who was promoting her talk show with the dot show, and then there was a lot of news around Google's abc.xyz. When we looked at what corporations were doing with their new GTLDs, we found that 78% of new GTLDs were not resolving. When we looked at the new GTLDs on MarkMonitor servers, we found that hundreds of thousands of visits were captured so far. Some of these visits could provide valuable information and can convert to real dollars back to the company. In terms of .brand delegations, which means the TLD was added to the root zone, as of December 2nd, 261, or 45%, had been delegated. So while we haven't seen a whole lot of use yet, I anticipate that we'll see more use in 2016 and in 2017. But for now, it seems to be more defensive registrations than anything. In 2015, we saw more brand owners focusing on optimizing their domain portfolios. We saw companies actually taking the steps necessary to rationalize and put values to their portfolios. This involved aligning domain registrations with trademark coverage, identifying those low-risk domains that are no longer needed, and either setting them to do not renew, letting them expire, or selling them on the secondary market. And we saw an increase of companies actually monitoring where the domains are pointing and redirecting them to recapture that lost traffic and potential lost revenue. By undergoing these rationalization and optimization exercises, it allows companies to better understand the value of their portfolio. It allows you to effectively promote and protect your brand, redirecting that traffic, capturing lost traffic, which in turn can recapture potential lost revenue, all which helps reduce or contain costs. In order to really understand the value of existing portfolios, we helped many of our clients score, tier, and review their domains. That essentially means categorizing domains as core, key, important, unlimited to ensure proper coverage and identifying possible domains to let go by either selling or simply letting them expire. One of the critical steps that was taken to reduce and contain cost was to do that categorizing exercise and identifying those domains that have limited value. On average, 25% of corporate portfolios contain domains that we considered limited in value and could possibly be purged from portfolios or sold on the secondary market. Those domains that have no alignment with your trademark or marketing activities could be viewed as having limited value. In addition, those TLDs that are high cost, highly restricted, could be considered low risk and have limited value. Those domains with low traffic, low value could be possibly considered as low risk. And of course, before you let anything expire, before you resell it, you always need to be mindful that some of those domains could be considered, could be used for internal applications or other internal uses. So always be mindful of that before you let a domain go. We've been saying it for a while. Last year we talked about it a lot with our clients that every domain should have a purpose. While 44% of corporate domain portfolios still do not resolve, we are seeing more companies take steps to point their domains to relevant content, and more importantly, capturing and measuring traffic. Not only does it provide important intelligence like location of users and type of traffic, but it provides a better user experience and can be used to help score your domains and can also help to recover lost revenue. So another key trend, and which is always top of mind with MarkMonitor and MarkMonitor clients, is domain security. It should always be a priority for domain owners. Not only did the number of registry breaches increase in 2015, it was 9 in 2014 and it was 11 in 2015, we saw waves of phishing schemes targeting domain owners, especially in the second half of the year. Many of these scams consist of the fraudulent emails that were sent to domain owners that at first glance appeared to come from the domain registrar, and it prompted the domain owner to click on a link which resulted in the download of malware. Other tactics included DDoS attacks, SQL injection, and brute force attacks, all of which resulted in havoc for the affected companies. Not only can personal data be compromised, but these attackers can gain access to your domain management and DNS provider accounts and either hijack or redirect your domains, which in turn damages your reputation and results in loss of revenue and customer trust. Having preemptive security measures in place, such as registry locking, two-factor authentication, and IP access restriction, can help protect your critical domain assets should anyone in your organization fall victim to one of those scams, or if your login credentials become compromised. We did see an increase in registry locking among the most highly trafficked sites. We saw it increase from 48% of the top 100 had registry locking in 2014, and in 2015 that increased to 53%. Although I like seeing that increase, that means 47% of the most highly trafficked sites still don't utilize registry locking. In the case of a CCTLD, registry locking may not be available, but there are several domains within the 47% that could have registry locking applied. In terms of industries most at risk, you can see from the chart on the right that every industry is a target. This is taken from VeriSign's DDoS Trends report in third quarter of 2015. And the number of online company brands attacked per month remained steady month to month across the first 3 quarters of 2015. And this is according to the APWG's Phishing Activity Trend Report for the time period of Q1 to Q3 2015. Attacks are getting more sophisticated, so it's imperative that you protect your domains, your domain management accounts, and your domain or your DNS management accounts with those additional security levels or security services. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kiran, and she will take you through some of the key initiatives that were in motion at ICAN over 2015. So take it away, Kiran.
Thanks, Allison, and welcome everybody to the webinar. Thanks for joining us. In 2015, we saw some pretty significant progress on a number of really important initiatives at ICAN. The 4 sort of main ones that were of great concern to brand owners I'll review here, although of course there's much more than just these 4 things going on at ICAN. The 4 that I think are most valuable for us to review today are the IANA Stewardship Transition and Accountability Initiative, the upcoming reviews of the new GTLD program and the subsequent rounds discussion, including the rights protection mechanisms review and the review of consumer trust and competition and safety. And then the third is the next generation WHOIS policy development process, which is now being called the Next Generation Registration Directory Services, or RDS. And then the final was a discussion that was sparked towards the end of the year between brand owners and intellectual property advocates and contracted parties such as registrars and registries about how to best handle abuse complaints, especially in light of some of the language of the new Registrar Accreditation Agreement from 2013. So the IANA transition and ICAN accountability is actually in a really interesting place now. The ICG, which is the Stewardship Transition Coordination Group, announced the completion of its work at the end of October, just sort of pending and waiting for the final recommendations from the Cross-Community Working Group on Accountability, which is very much in a critical stage right now. And we have some really fantastic advocates in our community who are working on this initiative, some of whom are actually on the call, so hi guys. So the ICAN Accountability Initiative, currently the GNSO Council is reviewing public comments on the proposal that was put forth by the CCWG. A couple of the hot topics, although certainly not all of them, are the inclusion of human rights languages and to what extent ICAN needs to explicitly state its commitment to international norms of human rights in the accountability documents. Including, the integration of the standards under the UN Declaration of Human Rights and things like that. Another thing is what are ICAN's remit and responsibilities going to be, and how will the community deal with policy development? Will that stay in the hands of the generic name supporting organization or the GNSO? How will governments interact with policy development, et cetera? So big topics on the table, working through it with vigor. People are spending a lot of time on that, and we expect to see some major progress in 2016 on this in time for the scheduled transition, which I believe is in September. So, of course, the main question there is how do we keep ICAN as an organization accountable to the multi-stakeholder community without the oversight of the U.S. government? So, the next hot topic, which I know everybody in the domain world is eagerly awaiting, is the new GTLD subsequent round. So as if we don't have enough to deal with from the first round of applications, we are now beginning discussion about opening up either a next round or sort of continuing cycle of applications moving forward. The final issue report was published and the draft charter was approved by the Generic Name Supporting Organization Council. The key brand issues that are contained within are, top-level RPMs, legal rights objections, string similarity issues. So I think some of us will recall car and cars, hotel, hotels, and how people are going to deal with the challenges that those types of things present for brand owners. Second level RPMs, obviously a huge topic. The Trademark Clearinghouse review, Sunrise processes and procedures, and then sort of along that same line, we'll be looking at hopefully premium pricing and reserved and named issues as well. ICAN has stated that they want to stay out of any sort of regulation of pricing. However, the brand community sort of feels that the pricing and reserved names issues sort of effectively defeated or at least challenged the brand community in a way that that was contrary to the purpose of the rights protection mechanisms that were put in place. So that will be on the table for discussion, and hopefully we'll get some good results and better results moving forward to avoid some of the challenges that we've seen with launches that Alison spoke about earlier. We're going to be talking about .brands, how .brands have been used so far in this round, to the extent that they have been used, and what sort of issues they would like to see resolved with the contracting process and other issues moving forward in subsequent rounds. Contract enforceability is huge. Does the application and your promises to the community represent a contract at that stage? How will we integrate public interest commitments in the next round? That was a challenge for us. And then, of course, the consumer trust, choice, and competition, which I mentioned earlier is under review, will be a huge thing for brands as well, because ultimately brand protection in the domain name space has to do with protecting the consumer and our customers, but also making sure that we respect the principles of choice and competition as well. With all of these things on the table and the way that the reviews are going, we don't anticipate seeing any round of subsequent rounds earlier than 2018. There is some discussion about bifurcating the rounds to have brands go first and then generics come later, because some of the review issues are not as relevant to a single registrant model, like .brands, and the contract will be significantly different. It already is significantly different, but there was a lot of work done on that front. So a brand round might be a little bit earlier, but I still don't see that happening before early 2018. So this is a timeline that was put forth by ICAN some time ago, and as you can see, it's already extremely outdated, because if we went by this timeline, we'd be done with the rights protection mechanisms review, and in fact, we actually haven't started it yet. So, but ICAN still has this timeline on its reviews page as current, and I think it's valuable for us to look at just to sort of see the interconnectability and the interdependability of each review. So, forget the years on top, but just kind of look and see the work that we have to do before we get to a second round, and how it's going to be all sort of concurrent, and how it's going to be a very, very busy year for us at ICAN. So another hot topic for everybody is WHOIS. What's going to happen with WHOIS? The Privacy Proxy Services final report was published and approved by the GNSO Council, represented over 2 years of hard work from the community, and concentrated on putting standards in place for the relay of communication to registrants behind privacy shields, and then the principles upon which details can be revealed or disclosed to requesting parties, and of course the indemnification that the requesting parties have to give the services and the protections that need to be put in place for very important principles of safety and privacy. So the next stage of Privacy Proxy Services accreditation is the implementation working group will convene. We suspect it will be a lot of the same people that worked on the policy development, and that will probably take at least a year, and then we'll start actually seeing a rollout of the principles and the processes for brand owners to be able to more effectively address the challenge that's presented by privacy and proxy services in a way that serves consumers and still respects privacy rights. The other big thing on WHOIS is that they're going to totally scrap it, and they're going to knock down to the ground and build it right back up. They're calling that the Next Generation Registration Directory Services. The PDP has launched. It launched this week. We had our first call on Tuesday as a group. We are electing leaders. So the brand owner participation is welcome and encouraged. For more information, there's an announcement on the ICAN homepage, and it's very, very easy to join, either as an observer or as a participant. I think we have some new brand owner participants, and we're very excited for that. This will be a huge issue for everybody. And while it's going to be a big process, watch this space, watch our blog, and kind of wait and see where it's going to be really important for brand owners to become involved if you can't do the whole process. And we'll help you understand where issues become critical and where you might want to chime in with comments and get your voice on the record to make sure that WHOIS remains a thing. There are some who want to eliminate it completely. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. And also, to make sure that it's a robust and accessible model. So not to scare anybody, but this is what the next generation WHOIS policy development process is going to look like. And so when I say it's complicated, and when I say it's going to be a big, long process and procedure, I was not lying to you. So all of these elements are going to be related, and of course this slide will be available afterwards if you want to look at it closely, but to be honest with you, I'm just sort of showing this to you so that you know how hard we're working on this. And these issues are all going to be interdependent. There are going to be multiple phases. We're going to sort of go back and forth on these issues, and that's why it's so important for brand owners to maintain a robust voice through all of these processes, because a lot of these issues are very important to brand owners, and we need to make sure that our voice is heard throughout. But don't worry, we have your back on this issue, and we'll be helping you through the process. The other big issue on the table in 2015 was how far ICAN really needs to go to help brand owners and IP owners to interact with registrars and registries about content of websites or use of websites that are considered abusive. So ICAN put forward this graphic, which again will be available, these slides will be available to you afterwards, so we don't need to go into it in detail. They put out this graphic to help us understand what they consider their remit and responsibilities and what they consider voluntary action, what they consider contractual compliance. And this really brought the parties to the table to start discussing sort of best practices, or at least sort of suggested practices to make it simpler and easier for brand owners facing volumes of abuse online to help address these issues. And so we've been involved in that discussion. It will be an interesting one continuing in 2016. We haven't really gotten anywhere yet, but we do anticipate that the registrars will be willing and able to discuss with us this year as well. So I think it would be huge if we could come to the table as a community on that. So a little background on that, the Registrar Accreditation Agreement does have language that suggests there is a duty to respond appropriately to reports of abuse. Of course, the question remains what respond appropriately means, and that's sort of what we're trying to get clarification on. And of course, there's a WHOIS accuracy specification as well, which is very helpful for brand owners. So like I said, standard best practices are in development voluntarily from registrars and registries, and so we are going to be working on that in 2016. I think that'll be a big issue. So just a little sampling of where we're going this year with ICAN, and I will turn it back to Alison to discuss domain strategies for 2016.
Thank you so much, Kiran. Now that we have a better understanding of what occurred in 2015 and what companies focused on, let's take a look at some of the top domain strategies going into 2016. First is to implement and enforce policies. You may already have clearly defined policies in place, and if you do, that's a great start. But businesses, their needs continually change and evolve, and companies need to ensure that their policies are still in line with their business objectives. If you don't have any policies in place, over-registration occurs, and you'll find yourself with a costly, bloated, or misaligned domain portfolio. Not only should your internal policies address what, when, and where domains should be registered, who is allowed to request a registration, and any kind of budget limitations, they should clearly identify the criteria for domains to let expire or sell. And then another key point is to work with stakeholders to determine where domains should point. And don't just define the policies, really make sure that they are implemented and enforced. So make portfolio consolidations part of your domain policies. It allows you better control and visibility into your domain portfolio. If you haven't consolidated your portfolio, or if you've recently acquired another company, work with marketing, IT, e-commerce, your legal group to identify registrations. These groups could provide insight into where and why certain domains were registered. Another way to identify domains that need to be consolidated is to compare your trademark holdings against domain registrations. Using a tool like MarkMonitor's Domain Intelligence allows companies to quickly identify where trademarks are registered and where the corresponding domains are registered. And then you could also use tools like MarkMonitor's Reverse WHOIS that helps to uncover lost registrations. You can search by email address, phone number, company name, and quickly uncover domains you were not aware that you had. So another key strategy for 2016 is to ensure your domain strategies are aligned with your policing and enforcement programs. Companies will continue to face tough registration and renewal decisions this year. And it's not enough just to have a domain strategy in place. Now more than ever, companies need to combine their registration renewal strategies with the policing and enforcement programs. Now is the time to ensure your domain registrations that should consist of proper levels of coverage, focus on corporate online objectives, categorize your brands to help ensure that your registrations are aligned with your trademark coverage, and implement a monitoring program that allows you to quickly identify potential domain abuse and then allows you to take immediate action when that abuse does occur. Leverage things like URS and UDRP, and then also take advantage of domain back ordering to recover some of those infringing domains. So when we talk about ensuring appropriate levels of coverage, brands determined to be core or key are typically those brands that require greater coverage. You can look at variations, misspellings, and typo squats in the .com domain for those types of assets. For important or limited brands, focus on exact match registrations unless you encounter significant cyber squatting. That would change your strategy. Brands with more than 5,000 instances of registration abuse in a .com should typically be treated as a key brand. Align those domain with trademark coverage. So if you have a trademark registered in a particular country, like France, have that corresponding .fr domain also registered. Using an automated tool, like I talked about earlier about domain intelligence, can help you quickly accomplish that coverage and make sure your registrations are accurate. When identifying where to register, you should ensure that your domains provide adequate coverage, but it's also important to think about future marketing needs. If your objective is to maximize your exposure on the web and generate e-commerce revenue, you should focus on geographic locations where you have an office or do business, TLDs that support that worldwide sales and marketing efforts, all legacy GTLDs, select new GTLDs, and top 10, 25, or e-commerce countries. If your company's culture is one that is extremely risk adverse, then registering defensively may make sense. Those extensions that are most at risk for cyber squatting include popular legacy GTLDs, free or low cost unrestricted CCTLDs, and unrestricted generic new GTLDs. Now, while registering defensively can help ensure that your clients find you, it does not negate the need for actively monitoring for abuse. So we all know that defensive registrations no longer ensure protection. You must align your registration strategies with your policing and enforcement programs. You should also leverage blocking where you can, but know that if your brand is generic, you may not be able to block your brand. Monitor for abusive registrations and take appropriate action when it occurs. In general, you can start with a cease and desist letter. You can leverage URS, UDRP, or the ADR. Use rights protection mechanisms and use domain back ordering or anonymous acquisitions as possible methods of recovery. If you don't know what your enforcement options are, you don't know your best course of action, MarkMonitor can help you identify your best course of action. So many companies are frequent targets of infringements, and it makes recovery of all those infringements impractical from a cost perspective. Brand owners should develop a prioritizing ranking system to allow for a recovery strategy that matches the significance of the threat. So sending a cease and desist is often the most cost-effective option, but compliance by the domain owner is completely voluntary. Cease and desist have higher success rates when the registrant has registered the domain without knowledge of their infringement. They're a good option if quick recovery is not critical. If the domain is regarded as a nice-to-have rather than a business-critical domain, If the UDRP ADR option is a viable escalation, it should the cease and desist fail. URS is one of the rights protection mechanisms introduced with the new GTLD program. While the cost relative to UDRP is appealing, it's important to understand that it only applies to new GTLDs and select CCTLDs. And a successful judgment only suspends the domain. You cannot transfer it to your ownership. In addition, the URS is more strict than the UDRP, and brand owners must demonstrate infringement by a clear and convincing standard of evidence. URS is a good option if suspension rather than recovery is an acceptable outcome. If legal rights in the form of a registered or common law trademark exist, and the current usage of the domain violates your trademark rights. The UDRP is applicable to all GTLDs, including new GTLDs and some CCTLDs. A successful judgment allows you to either transfer it to your control or you can request that the domain be deleted, but I think that almost never happens. UDRP is a good option if quick recovery, typically 3 to 4 months, is not of critical concern. If legal right in the form of a registered or common law trademark exists, and current usage violates the mark holder's rights and or represents a reputational or security issue. Domain backordering, or you may know it as domain snapping, is another low-cost recovery option that only allows for recovery of domains that are not renewed by the current owner. Backordering is not always successful and shouldn't be relied upon for business-critical domains. Backordering has changed since the early days where domains were deleted upon the true expiration date. Now providers have exclusive rights to resell their expired domain names, and multiple requests for the same domain through the same provider could result in auction and increased cost. The key to utilizing the backorder option is to backorder through multiple backorder providers if you do choose to go with that option. Domain acquisitions should be considered over other recovery options if you have an imminent new product or service launch, there's a lack of provable bad faith, you're under a tight deadline, or UDRP or ADR are not viable options. When using the acquisition option, some of the best practices include determining the budget and strategy early on and setting expectations that are in line with the domain's value. It's important to consider the owner and how the domain is being used, and purchasing the domain anonymously can help keep those purchase prices at a lower range than a business openly negotiating the purchase on their own. So let's talk about how to secure and protect those critical assets. I know I touched on this earlier, but cybercriminals are using increasingly advanced techniques to target your assets. Ensure you are employing those preemptive security measures I touched on earlier to help protect your domains. Measures such as a two-factor authentication, advanced locking, such as Registrar or Registry Locking, restricting portal access to certain IP addresses, implement those forced password changes, and receive automated email notifications of every domain change. Put operational policies in place like limited account access. Not every stakeholder needs to have administrative access to your domain account. However, if they do, ensure that you're setting proper controls by limiting what they're able to do within the account. And always be sure to keep logins, passwords, and auth codes safe and never reveal them within your domain management portal. So here is a quick review of MarkMonitor's security best practices. Follow these best practices will help you protect your critical domain assets, your domain management and DNS management account. Locking those core domains at the registry level whenever possible. Not only is it possible on TLDs like .com, .net, but there are several CCTLDs where we're able to provide that registry locking. Employ two-factor authentication for not only the domain management, but the DNS management account. Implement DNS monitoring, which essentially checks the DNS in your MarkMonitor portal against what is listed out the registry, and if there's a mismatch, we receive an alert, essentially. Never share login credentials for domains or DNS management portals. Disable the ability to edit core domains for all users. So you can grant access into an account and just limit what they're able to do, maybe just only read-only access. Continually manage and review secondary user accounts. Make that part of an exit program where as employees leave, you remove their access from the MarkMonitor portal. Require mandatory password updates, implement the IP access restrictions, and utilize a corporate-only registrar, one that has policies in place to protect those critical assets. The final tip for securing your critical access is when you're launching a new product. Prior to any launch, there are many important questions to be answered. For instance, where are the domains available? Will the product be launched globally or domestically? Do you need to register in a local language to support global promotions? Is confidentiality a concern? When you're checking the domain availability to see which domains are available, ensure that you are using a trusted WHOIS service. It's critical that the WHOIS service used is secure and that any domain searched remain confidential. And if you're launching a new brand domestically and there is a high tolerance for risk, your domain coverage will be on a smaller scale, focusing on those legacy GTLDs and select new GTLDs. And then again, if the product is launching globally and your main objective is to maximize the exposure, follow those steps I mentioned earlier with the all legacy GTLDs, select new GTLDs, and those top 10, 20, 25 ccTLDs. And finally, if privacy is of utmost concern, utilize a third-party registrar to ensure that your domains are completely masked. So let's talk about maximizing the value of existing portfolios. Companies should focus on maximizing the value of their existing portfolio through right-sizing and domain utilization, reviewing your portfolio at least once a year to identify registration gaps, out-of-policy registrations, and underutilized domains that may not necessarily be needed anymore and are eating into your domain budget. So a key part of that is to identify where your domains are pointing. I touched on this earlier, to ensure that every domain resolves to some kind of content. A basic premise that applies to virtually all businesses is that traffic equals revenue. Site visits positively impact your bottom line. Identify where domains are pointing and redirect to recover that lost traffic. Again, remember every domain should have a purpose. So some of the utilization best practices is to leverage use of web forwarding. Align utilization with your search optimization strategies. And I've also included some examples of where you can forward some of those misspellings or product names. Just make sure that all your domains are forwarding to appropriate content. So as far as some best practices, these exercises should be performed yearly at minimum. Consolidate and score your portfolio. Selectively register or recover high-value domains. Implement and enforce those policies. Ensure your domains are resolving to the relevant and appropriate content. Leverage blocking where available. And actively police and only take action where required. Take the steps to actually retire those low-value, low-risk domains and sell when it is appropriate. So in terms of how we can control new GTLD costs, just because the domain environment has expanded because of new GTLDs, it doesn't necessitate increased domain budgets. New GTLDs will continue to launch throughout the year, so you need to still make those smart registration decisions, but on top of that, now smart renewal decisions. And there's also another reason why tracking that traffic is so important. Leverage blocking where you can to help maintain some of those costs. And register when there's a close nexus between the TLD and the brand, or if you have a low tolerance for risk. So our final tip for 2016 is to stay informed and get involved. And I'll pass it back over to you, Kiran.
Great, thanks. So with ICAN, the best way to get involved is just to sort of watch this space and kind of wait for us to let you know when the time is ripe, because it's a little bit difficult to sort of monitor the space unless you're doing it full-time, like I am, for example. So watch the space. We'll let you know when to get involved. Here are some of the ways that you can keep track yourself with ICAN initiatives, and of course, we're always available in here for questions if you see something come through and you want to know if that's something you should get involved in. And you know, we encourage your participation on these issues if you have the time and interest to do so. There are three sort of main groups for brand owners: the business constituency, the intellectual property constituency, where I'm a member, and the brand registry group. And then, of course, we also have representation on the business constituency and the registrar group as well. So we're sort of well covered. We've got you covered.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Alison and Kiran. So we had a lot of questions come in, and I think we have some time. We're going to try to get through as many of these as possible. We had some questions come in through chat as well as Q&A. Just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, just submit them through the Q&A tab on your screen. All right, so the first question, how do I go about tracking traffic on my domain?
Okay, well, if you are using MarkMonitor servers, our web forwarding or our high availability or free DNS, we do track that traffic for you. So we have a section within the domain management portal where DNS can be managed, and we track that traffic for you. So there's nothing additional you need to do. However, if you are not using MarkMonitor servers, then you would just have to work with your DNS provider to get those kind of statistics.
Okay, great. The next question, do the premium names or extortionate pricing help to prevent cyber squatters from registering certain brand domains?
Thanks for the question. This is Kiran. There's no real way to tell. Certainly that's what the registries are saying, that the intention of the premium names and extortionate pricing is. However, it's very difficult to tell whether or not that's actually prevented anybody from registering a brand. I do know that when some brands have refused to pay premium pricing in Sunrise, there have been some registrations in general availability by cyber squatters. We've seen some UDRPs and some URS come through on those issues. There is some question, and we'll be looking at this in the RPM review, about even whether the Trademark Claims Service has prevented registrations in cyber squatting. There are numbers that suggest that these mechanisms may help prevent, but again, very, very difficult to tell. So that will be something we'll be addressing in the RPM review.
Great. What is the best way to evaluate resale value on a large portfolio or domain?
Well, we have a team here at MarkMonitor that can help you essentially score your domain portfolio. There is a number of criteria they look at. We use a proprietary scoring algorithm that looks at factors such as how many times a brand string is found in your portfolio, or character count, TLD popularity, estimated monthly searches. But there's also some other factors that need to be considered in the scoring, including internal business intelligence, like regional brand and or product popularity, recovery strategies, you know, if you do let it expire, how easy is it to well, not necessarily easy it is to get it back, but we do have a whole team here at MarkMonitor, and if you are a MarkMonitor client, you can just reach out to your domain client services manager, and you know, we'll get you in touch with that team to help you do that.
Great, thanks, Alison. So the next question, does the next-gen WHOIS perform actual verification?
Hi, thanks again. This is Kiran. We hope that it will. We're currently just at the process of discussing what the options are, and I do know that the concerns that you're worried about look like you can provide bogus physical addresses and phone numbers and bogus email addresses and you know, unmonitored email addresses, and it's very difficult in the past to ensure that registrars are accurately verifying and validating that information. We have seen an increase in the verification and validation as a result of the WHOIS accuracy specification in the registration accreditation agreement, and an increase in the tools that are available to us through ICAN and with registrars directly to address bogus WHOIS information. We do see that as a problem. It is of prime importance to the Next Generation RDS Policy Development Process Working Group to address that, and we hope that eventually that kind of behavior will be prevented. And while it's very, very difficult to stop that behavior completely, we hope to have robust tools in place to address it when we do see those problems leak through the cracks.
Great, thank you, Kiran.
Gina, can I chime in for a minute? On that last question, I realized I kind of went way over to the wrong side. I was asked about the resale value and how you evaluate the resale value, not necessarily what the value of your domains. So our team does look at things like comparable sales and what TLD that your domains are covering. And if you do have a large portfolio of domain names that you are looking to resell, we can certainly help you with that and, basically maximize the value, maybe find a seller for a bulk of them, or we definitely do help you with that research. So I realized I completely went off to left field with my prior question, or my prior answer.
Thanks for adding to that, Alison. Mm-hmm. So one last question. How do defensive registrations no longer ensure protection?
They no longer ensure protection because you can't defensively register everything from a cost perspective. You just simply can't do it. So it's not just about defensive registrations anymore. It's about blocking and just monitoring for abuse. If someone does register your brand, but they're not doing anything with it, anything harmful, you can you basically monitor it and watch it and see what happens. Perhaps they'll let it expire. That's what I meant by that.
Okay, thanks, Alison. So there were a couple questions that came in that I'm just going to answer. Somebody asked about downloading the deck. We are going to send that out. And somebody else asked, does MarkMonitor have an in-house authority on DNS? And that is Alison Simpson. So if you have any questions for her, you can email us at marketing@markmonitor.com. So thank you, Alison and Kiran, for this presentation. We really appreciate you sharing all that information with our audience today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. We had really great questions come in. As a reminder, like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides as well as the recording within the next couple of days. So you can be on the lookout for that. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.